I'm Belle Reid, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at the new pedal from Chase Bliss and Goodhertz called Lossy. Lossy was created in collaboration with Goodhertz, makers of the original Lossy Plugin. The pedal is more or less a direct hardware translation of the plugin, with a few extra tricks. So what does Lossy do? Lossy is a tool for exploring all of the screwed up sounds and artifacts that you can get from manipulating digital audio. It can make sounds like a super low bitrate MP3, like an old low quality YouTube video, or like streaming music on dial-up internet. I find this interesting because most lo-fi music is based on mimicking the sounds of cassettes or old home recording technology. But this is aimed at the technology of a slightly later time period. The early internet, primitive consumer-level digital recording equipment, and rewritable CDs. At the time, this all felt super high-tech, but now, looking back, it all had its own specific lo-fi charm. That said, Lossy isn't just about mimicking the sounds of this time period. Instead, it's really about exploring different aspects of the techniques that contributed to these sounds and magnifying all of the suboptimal aspects of data compression until they can become a creative tool in their own right. Lossy helps you explore these sounds and expand them into something that sounds similar, but offers much greater depth and room for creative manipulation. In the best situations, Lossy can become an instrument unto itself, creating independent textures that unfold alongside your incoming sounds. So in this video, I'll do an overview of all the primary controls on Lossy and share a lot of sounds with you. That said, Lossy is a super deep pedal with a lot of hidden options and options for user customization that I'm not going to cover extensively in this video. All right, with all that in mind, let's dive in. I think of Lossy as being organized into 4 different parts: the loss control, loss mode switch, and speed control. We'll talk about what these do in just a second. There's also a basic reverb that can be applied before the loss effects. There's a filter that allows you to focus the output into a particular spectral range, and the packets switch. This is a way of introducing intermittent errors and dropouts to the sound. We'll talk more about this later as well. But first, let's get a feel for the other individual controls. It's worth noting that Lossy can be used with mono or stereo input and output. For this video, I have it set up for mono input and stereo output. I also have spread engaged on the rear panel dip switches, which introduces automated stereo movement to the output. The global knob sets the overall amount of processing. Lossy doesn't have a true wet-dry mix control that allows you to balance between your unprocessed and processed sound. Instead, the global control is something like a macro knob that alters all of the other parameters to some extent. The loss mode switch selects between 3 different algorithms for modeling unique data compression defects. The loss knob determines the overall amount of loss, meaning how much the outgoing audio resembles the incoming audio and how much instead is transformed. Depending on the selected loss mode, the effect of the loss knob will change. We'll discuss all of the modes a bit more later on, but here are some sounds to give you a sense of what they're like. The speed knob controls the rate of the loss effect, as well as some other settings that we're going to discuss later on. At higher settings, it'll track your input fairly immediately and will sound fairly garbled. And at lower settings, it will track less closely and will smear your input a bit more. You can think of Lossy's filter section as being like a bandpass filter. The filter slope switch allows you to determine how steep the bandpass filter is on each side of the passband. A gentler slope will be more subtle, and the steeper slope will be more aggressive and precise. The filter knob controls the bandwidth, allowing a very wide range of frequencies to pass when it's turned down, and focusing in on a narrower bandwidth the more you turn it up. And the frequency knob controls the filter cutoff frequency. The reverb knob controls the amount of reverb applied before the data compression effects. This can be a way to make Lossy sound a bit more smeared and to track your incoming audio with a bit more lag. There is a dip switch setting for configuring the reverb to make it before or after the data compression effect. But for this video, I'm going to leave it set to before. Moving on to packets. So this control has 3 selectable states. In the middle, no packet effects are applied. On the right, data packets are randomly dropped, introducing random audio dropouts. And on the left, instead of randomly dropping audio, random packets will be repeated at a rate determined by the speed knob. In my opinion, this is one of the coolest parts of the pedal, and I'm going to talk about it more in depth and share more demos in a while. There are 3 different loss modes that each have their own unique flavor of data compression. So let's take a look at each of them in turn. The standard mode is designed to emulate the sound of a low bitrate MP3. The inverse mode to the left is similar to standard, but the audio you hear in inverse mode is everything that would be stripped away with the same settings in standard mode. Having a high loss setting in standard mode will give you a fairly full sound, but having a high loss setting in inverse mode, you'll be left with something very thin and wispy. Jitter mode introduces inaccuracies in phase and timing due to imperfect clocking. This generally sounds much more smeary and diffuse. Certain settings on the pedal can almost sound reverb-like. So whereas the standard and inverse mode sound more like a poor spectral reconstruction using mostly sinusoidal sounds, the jitter mode is much noisier. Okay, so now let's listen to some different sound sources so you can hear how they'll play with each mode. All right, so there's obviously already a huge range of sounds with these controls alone, but let's move on and discuss the packets control next. In the examples we just listened to, we had the packet switch set to the middle setting in which no packet effects are applied. As mentioned before, the packet switch introduces different types of audio errors. When switched to the right, we'll get intermittent audio dropouts, and when set to the left, we'll get intermittent audio repeats. In either of these modes, the speed control will adjust the rate of the packet effect. So let's start with the packet loss setting. In the packet repeat mode, instead of getting random dropouts, small segments of audio get frozen at random times. This can have a somewhat stutter or glitch-like effect, depending on the other settings on the pedal. For me, this is where this pedal gets really exciting, because we get to a point where the output doesn't so closely resemble the input. The pedal kind of starts to generate its own textures out of the material that you send into it, and it starts to become more of an instrument in its own right.
Holiday deals on tire deals, local tire and wheel, 2212, down 8th Street, Rogers. Tire and
building overnight before anticipating tomorrow rain. That's the weather where you live by news meteorologists.
Lossy includes two different types of spectral freeze effects, which can be activated using the left foot switch. When you press and hold the left foot switch, Lossy will freeze the incoming audio in what's referred to as the solid state. Once the audio is frozen, you can use the other controls to manipulate the frozen texture, which can result in some really beautiful and interesting sounds and textures. In this state, changes in the incoming audio won't have any effect on the frozen texture. When you quickly tap and release the left foot switch, Lossy enters into the slushy freeze state. In this state, the frozen audio changes in response to the incoming audio at a rate determined by the speed control. You can use this to do some pseudo time stretching effects and to create evolving textures that change alongside your incoming sounds. Using the slushy freeze state or the different packet modes makes it feel less like Lossy is just a tool for making messed up, low quality versions of the incoming audio. And instead, it becomes almost like a textural resynthesis tool, turning your incoming sound into completely new sounds. These sounds will in some way resemble what you put into the pedal, but as you can hear, they can also be drastically transformed. Again, it's almost like having another instrument altogether, one that makes huge clusters of sine waves, or garbled chirps and stutters, or waves of evolving noise. Lossy, like most other Chase Bliss pedals, has an extra layer of depth available via the hidden options. You'll see that each of these knobs has an alternate label in white below the primary label in pink. If you hold down both foot switches at once and turn a knob, you're accessing the knob's secondary setting rather than its primary setting. There are a number of extra functions here that I'm not going to discuss in depth, but some of the most useful parts of this hidden layer are a compressor that allows you to dial in the dynamic range of the loss effects. This can be super handy since some settings can otherwise result in very quiet or very loud outputs. And additionally, there's a noise gate, which can be used for both typical gating effects or more aggressive dynamic audio chopping. Additionally, the back of the pedal has tons of dip switches for customizing various settings regarding audio routing, foot switch behavior, and internal modulation. One of the most interesting parts of this for me is that there's an internal modulation generator that can be used to affect any of the main panel controls. The pedal also allows for CV and expression pedal control, as well as MIDI control, which is particularly cool for live performance and interaction. So originally, when I heard about Lossy, I thought it was going to be similar to a tape saturation or lo-fi effect, a different take on ways to make your audio a little bit grungy and generally kind of screwed up. And while I think that would have been useful in its own right, and while Lossy definitely can do all of that, I was really surprised to discover the range of sonic manipulation that's available within this pedal. I have already used Lossy in a lot of my own personal music, and I plan to keep using it and exploring it in the future. I personally see it as a way of getting a lot more out of even an individual instrument, and a way of getting to some surprising, new, unexpected territory that might spark new directions in my music making. Special thank you to Chase Bliss for sending me a Lossy to check out and for making such cool pedals. There's a link in the description below this video to Chase Bliss's website if you want to check it out and learn more. And if you want to try out some of these sounds, but the pedal format isn't right for you, remember that you can also get the plugin from Goodhertz, and I'll leave a link to that below as well. If you're interested in joining a great community of folks who are passionate about things like experimental sound, modular synths, and electroacoustic music, or if you're interested in things like behind-the-scenes content and unreleased music, then I invite you to check out and possibly join my Patreon community, which is patreon.com/SarahBelleReid. All right, that's it for today. As always, thank you so much for watching and for listening, and I'll see you next time.